Hello, hello! Welcome to my video about Pricolici, I think is how it's pronounced? I don't know. But more specifically, this is the first video in a little October series that I do on rare occasions, where I take cryptids that are lesser known throughout the world, and I try to make monster girls out of them. Not the most creative thing ever, but it's still pretty interesting. I've done this specific thing once before, but I've also done like the whole Monster Girl thing, trying to find more obscure ones several times, including the Scary Lessons Girls, which was a comic that I drew, and it was going to be a game, but I realized very quickly I did not have the time to do that and keep myself financially supported, so I just had to kind of give up on that, because I didn't have the time to even write it, much less anything else. Okay, but anyways. To that end, after this particular video is done, the next video that I do, and I plan to try to get at least 4 of these done this month. Maybe 5. We will see. Maybe 1. Nervous laughter. You guys in the comment section, leave where you are from and give me ideas on what cryptid I should do next. And I would prefer it to be something that is kind of obscure. Not necessarily just like stupid obscure, but just something that people don't really regularly talk about. In the past, I've done several of these, including like some sort of weird Australian long arm thing, which sort of looks like the thing that I'm drawing now. And also a frog girl from, I think, Puerto Rico. I started out the series from a couple years ago with the Wampus, which is a sort of a cryptid from this area, this general area. But I've done several of them. If you are interested in those, go check them out. But otherwise, that's the backstory of this. Short little description, or short little explanation of where I've been, by the way. I've been working on a 2.5 hour long video. Yeah, I know, right? I originally wanted it to be like 30 minutes long. It was not. It was not. It is not going to be. I've managed to record a ton of footage for it, and I finally managed to record all 2.5 hours of it. This particular thing that I'm doing now is going to be about a little bit over an hour. Because it's a time lapse, so I can see how long it's going to be. Oh, it makes me groan, because I spent weeks trying... Whenever I'm doing this, it's much easier to just talk. Just... That's how I sound, by the way. See, I even do a straw man for my own voice. Isn't that nice? What the hell was I saying? But whenever I'm having to record something that is pre-written in script format, I have to speak like this, and I have to make sure that I enunciate everything correctly, and that there's no weird sort of mouth noises at the same time. That drives me insane. The other day I was finalizing the audio, and I had to go through and press play, listen for that little sort of just little bitty noises, and then isolate them and get rid of them, and I was doing that every few seconds. So it ended up taking me like 9 hours to finally get through the whole thing. Ugh, it's one of those struggles with making long-form content. People, where's he? How come he's not working? Lazy fucking asshole. And then you zoom in on my house, and it's just me every day doing something that feels like I'm doing nothing. Because it takes so much time, and one little mistake, and your decision-making can just fuck up everything. Okay, anyways, what's going on with the primary here is I had a very specific idea on what kind of pose that I wanted it to be, but it also included the necessity of foreshortening, so it took me absolutely forever to get to a point where I felt like, yes, this is the exact thing that I want. So me reposing this over and over and over again, believe me, it drove me insane whenever I was watching it too. So, okay, I decided to start with a Pricolici because someone I know is Romanian. And I figured, well, this would be a good resource to start from. Because if I have any questions, I can just ask. So if in the comment section you're like, he's mispronouncing Pricolici, blame her. No, I'm probably mispronouncing it, and I just don't remember how it's pronounced. But considering the area, don't blame me if I mispronounce anything, because Lord Almighty. Okay. In my exploration, Romania has a ton of different, like, folklore things to choose from. It has a lot of them, actually. Even to this day, Romania is sort of a pleasant little area. Definitely not a third world country. That has a lot of folk traditions and things of that nature. So I had a lot to choose from, because they have retained a lot of this stuff. Obviously, the thing that it's most well known for is Count Dracula, vampires, and so forth and so on. I didn't... Of course, obviously, this is for more obscure cryptids that aren't really explored that often. So I didn't want to do vampire, because why would I? What a boring thing to do. So to that end, I started going through things like Wikipedia lists, Reddit posts of people talking about different things. But this is more of a general... I'm going to talk in a kind of a general way here. In researching these things, you will discover a few things about the methodology, I guess, of how mythologies work. I think I said that correctly. Because these days, I'll compare this to... I've talked about this in the past. I'll compare this to, like, weapons. These days we have terms for, like, claymore, Zweihander, scimitar, falchion, all these different sword names. And whenever I say it, you can probably picture exactly what it looks like, right? However, back whenever people actually made these things and fought with weapons, there really weren't names for them. People just called them two-handed sword or one-handed sword, and that was pretty much it. They didn't really have names in the way that we have them now. They would not refer to them as being, a claymore or a Volge or a bardiche or anything like that. Those things just didn't exist. Instead, a lot of the designs just came from, there's a local weaponsmith, and he makes them a specific way, and that ends up being taught within that region. And all the weapons end up looking very similar, because honestly, it's not that big of a change between other designs that you might find in other parts of the world. But it ends up becoming so standardized for that region that it becomes sort of its own weapon. So, centuries later, in the 19th to 21st centuries now, whenever we stumble across these things, we need names for them. And so we come up with names for them in order to sort of categorize them, even though by the standards of the time, no such thing existed. When it comes to mythology, cryptids, things like that, the same sort of problem happens, where at the time, like whenever I say vampire, you guys probably have a very, very specific idea of what a vampire is. Ancient people did not. A really good example of this would be when I was going through and looking through all the lists of all the different Romanian things that I could have chosen from. There's like, Yele. I think I pronounced it correctly. Yes, high five, I remembered. Because it starts with like a Y sort of sound. There's the Yele, which is probably the most commonly emphasized, like, cryptid sort of thing in Romania. And unfortunately, it's really boring. It's like a woman wearing white. And that's kind of all it is. But boy, she wears that white. And then there's other things like, which ones are similar? Spiridush, and, it's like Strigoi, Strafes, Urias, I'm mispronouncing all these, and, Vantoase, I think, I can't quite remember all these pronunciations, but a lot of these, not all of those, but a lot of these are exactly the same thing. It's just that within Romania, if you go from one part of the country to another, or even like straight out of the country, they will have slightly different names. And that's because the telling of the stories about these things changes very slightly, as well as what pertains to those things, like what actually happens within the context of those stories. So, at first I was like, Vantaese is the thing that I originally had an idea for. And I was trying to figure out, well, what do they supposedly look like? And I could only find one example where it sounded like something interesting. And there was another one. I think Spiridush is the one that I'm thinking of, where Wikipedia described it as being like a little familiar, like a wizard familiar, that took on the qualities of a bird or like a crow, something avian, and it was used to communicate with hell and to do bargains with the devil and things like that. I thought, oh, that sounds like an interesting little fiction, and I can make a little cute avian monster girl that is like tiny and hangs out with you. So I started looking up information about this, like, can I find anything? If you Google that, you will find tons of pictures of elves. Like Santa elves. I'm being serious. Like, if you Google Spiridush, like Spirid, like with a D, Us, like U-S, it will just bring up lots of, like, Will Ferrell-esque elves. Guys, little short guys in green outfits. And from what I can gather, that's because Google translates that word automatically to just elf. And after it does that, it's like, oh, elves. What's an elf? And it just brings up pictures of elves, like stereotypical Santa elves. But of course, ancient, like, elves and goblins and little spirit things, kobolds, like anything like all these, like kobolds, elves, we have different ideas of what those are, and we imagine those in our head. But back then, they were just different words for the same general thing, which is basically just a little horrible thing. And that's all it is. So again, like bastard sword, claymore, falchion, etc. We made up lots of different words to describe and categorize things more stringently. Very ambiguous ideas that did not exist at the time. So, to that end, whenever I was researching all the Romanian ones, I discovered that pretty much all of them are the exact same thing. Like a Spiridush, Vantaese, they're all just Yellies with a different name, and they have different connotations. Like, one of them, for some reason, has a wagon, and that's like the only distinguishing thing about it. It's just another woman, a mysterious woman dressed in white that is associated with the wind for some reason, in a very vague, ambiguous way, and it has a wagon. And it uses the wagon to drive up winds, or something. So I went to Google Books. This is like the modern version of a library. And I started using that to try to cross-reference that word. And sometimes I would have to actually go through Romanian versions of this and, like, hard translate it in order to get a rough idea of what it was about. And one of the problems with researching cryptids like this is that there's almost no... Since all of it is, like, folk-based, there are almost no sources of information for this stuff. Because most of the ideas are just stories that people tell locally, and they don't bother writing it down. So whenever you start trying to research it, you have to eventually find someone that did bother to write it down. And because usually that's like one or two people, and they end up just citing each other, it ends up codifying that idea into something that is more straightforward. Like Dracula is a great example of this, because the more ancient version of what a vampire was may not have had anything at all to do with drinking blood, or being associated with the devil, or anything really. In some cases, you could use vampire to be an interchangeable concept with the concept of a ghost or zombie, or even a werewolf. And that's where the Pricolici comes in. I think a strigoi. There may also be a striga. I think striga is a different word. But strigoi is like a vampire or a zombie by our definition. Of course, a zombie is more of a North American concept or a Caribbean idea, which has different connotations entirely, but they're still basically the same thing. Just there is a very common theme amongst all people across the world of like things that come back from the dead. Like a person that should be dead and they come back because they were evil or because they were altered by someone that was evil, or something of that nature. So a Pricolici has that same problem, where I could tell you exactly what it is supposedly, but that's not going to be true. Because a Pricolici is basically... It's actually synonymous in some cases with just a werewolf. Like sometimes it's just, that's the term that is used for a werewolf. And the same is true for the term of, how was it? Varkalak? I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. Although that term is also associated with things like goblins or elves and so on. So all these things are like interrelated, because you remember like a goblin and an elf can mean the same thing in some contexts. So like Yellies, which I referenced before, which are these women in white dresses that are associated with the wind sometimes, could also be called elves or goblins or even Pricolici in some cases. It just depends on where you are, the context, why you're saying it. There are no rules. Like, because all this stuff is made up. There's no such thing. Secret, shh, don't tell. But there's no such thing as a werewolf. We just make this shit up. It's all imaginary. It's like people screaming about the differences between dragons. No, it's a wyvern. And this one obviously is a worm. And they're all made up. We're just making this shit up. So if you want it to be one's thing, just go ahead and pretend that that's exactly what it is. It does not matter. Anyways. So, the Pricolici, the general idea that I'm operating with, and I was communicating this stuff to you guys so that it would be clear that I struggled with this. The general idea is that it is a fusion between a werewolf and a vampire. And I chose this because I got tired of all the different Yelly variations, where it's just a lady wearing white. I got really fed up with that, because let's face it, even though there's tons of ancient, mysterious creatures, cryptids, and myths, and so on, there are tons of them, all across the world. Most of them are incredibly unimaginative. Most of the time, it's just... like, the Pricolici here. Most of the... I did some, like, Google book searches and stuff. Like, I use more than just Wikipedia for this stuff. If you just look up Wikipedia, Wikipedia's like, it is a werewolf-vampire fusion, because Wikipedia tries to codify the things as well. And it'll cite one or two resources, and then people will just go to Wikipedia and go, oh, I guess that's what it is. But it's not. Like I just explained, this stuff changes dramatically based on who you're talking to and where you are, etc. But the general idea is that the Pricolici is more associated with wolves, usually, or dogs. Although sometimes Pricolici as a word can be used to describe anything that shapeshifts, and sometimes it's just used to be a synonym for vampires, and sometimes it's used to be a synonym for like zombies or ghosts. It just depends. Had a lot of trouble researching this stuff. So, I decided to just... Here's my thought process. I got so frustrated with the whole Yelly thing. I was like, I'm not drawing a lady wearing white. ancient people were just not that creative. So I decided, what is Romania known for? Werewolves and vampires. I'm not drawing a werewolf or a vampire. That's too boring. So I decided, let's go with the Pricolici because it at least... Because if I'm drawing something for Romanian culture, then I want it to be something that's very pertinent there. But the only thing that seems to be especially pertinent is this ladies wearing white nonsense, or the werewolves and vampires. And there's like a few other... There's like a giant rat that is sometimes associated with Romania, but it's still just a giant rat. I thought that making a cute little, like, rat girl would be kind of fun, but... yeah. There's also, like, some giants, and... Actually, I think I have a list. Yeah, here we go. Dragons especially also. Romania also has a lot of dragons. But there are enough dragons as it is, believe me. I'm sick and tired of looking at dragons. There's, let's see... Balar, which is like a dragon with 7 heads. Baba, which I think actually is supposed to be like an old lady or something in some cases. I can't remember. Let's see. More dragons, vampires, various kinds of demons, ghosts. There's types of basilisks. I found a few cases of these where there is a monster that obviously came from a surrounding area, like Greece or something. And it's an evolved concept, because almost all myths like this are evolved ideas from another area. I was talking about this in stream the other day. There's a great video about this. I can't remember what it... Hold on, history. Dragon. Let me find it real fast. This won't actually take long. It is... Well, if my history would load correctly, instead of just ignoring what I told it to do. The True History of Real Dragons, the Oldest Dragon Myths and Their Origin. It's by Korkenford, I guess. This is a good video. It explains what the origins, from modern understanding and research, what the origin of dragons is. And it tracks back how the concept of, like, a dragon abducting a princess goes back to a mistranslation of dragons abducting cows or cattle, like your resources, and how that stemmed from sort of the Russian steppe area, and that came out of the Mongolia/China sort of area, at which point the myth was more about 2 dragons that were beneficial to the land, which stemmed from an Indian tradition of 2 antagonistic dragons that destroyed the land in their own way. And it just keeps going backwards through, like, the Egypt area, down through Africa, until you get to South Africa. And in South Africa, this supposedly is the most ancient version of the dragon myth. And it was just a flying snake that was associated with rainfall. And that was it. And that's where we get the whole concept of dragons from. It's just a very old idea that evolved over time through different cultures. Okay, anyways. This is what I find to be interesting about myths and all this stuff. So, Pricolici can be anything. But I wanted it to be associated with Romania, so this was the best idea to roll with. So, in my research, in going through all the books that I could find about it, which is not much, because usually it's just like a blurb. People just mention it once. Because really, there's not much to talk about. Because remember, this isn't stuff like if you research Dracula, you can find Bram Stoker stuff, and Vlad the Impaler, and so forth and so on. It's a hard codified thing because it came from one person, and that one person had definite influences, and he based it off this one thing. But when it comes to these more nebulous ideas, like what is a ghost, you can write a book about ghosts, but there's no way for you to track back the hard definition of what a ghost is, because these are just imagined concepts that don't exist. So in researching Pricolici, like whenever people write this stuff down, they're just taking, common stories that were from the general area, right? So whenever you research this stuff, you have the same problem of, sure, someone may have mentioned Pricolici in their book about, Romanian myths or something. But it will sometimes just come down to 1 or 2 paragraphs, because that's all you can really have. Because there's just no information about it. It's just a very loose idea, and you would have to just cite the source of Bob and Jake, or the Romanian version of those, and what their personal stories were that they made up, because that's what these cryptids are usually. And even whenever I was doing my videos on like Wampus, for example, in the previous years that I've done this little project, there is a defined Wikipedia version of what that is, but that is based off of a single retelling from one person, probably. So any other version of that story is now lost. So whatever the original idea, that's what I find so interesting, is where did the original idea come from? And you can sort of get a loose idea of what people were thinking and why they were thinking it at the time from reading all the different sourcing on this stuff. And from that, you can sort of form a loose guesstimation of why this was happening at the time. Like the whole dragon thing is a really good example of this, because it's such a pervasive thing that it's easily tracked back. But you can see that, and I think the guy in that video talks a lot about this. I really recommend watching that video. It depends on what the local resources were, what the local politics were, whether people were struggling to make ends meet, whether the weather was plentiful, whether they were, using like moose as opposed to cows or whatever, in order to support themselves in their everyday life. And based on that, the circumstances and the telling of the stories will change. Because whenever you're telling this, I guess, to the people around you, the children that you're raising, then you end up with that same issue of how do I... like, if you move from one area to another, and you used to raise cows, and now you get to that new area and you don't have any cows for whatever reason. You couldn't bring them with you because you split off from a neighboring village, and the cows are not hardy enough to survive that area, so now you have to use something else, whatever it is. Then the kids are going to be like, what's a cow? And you'd have to change the story to, well, like, forget that it was a cow. A dragon came and took they took Dirty Bill, who's the guy that we dress up to look like a cow. And, oh yeah, Dirty Bill, I know him. I don't know why I made up that. Good old Dirty Bill. But you get the idea. Just it always changes. So, with Pricolici, in researching all the various books that I could find on it, I found some individual paragraphs and things of that nature. And all the examples that I could find tend to be very particular kinds of stories. Even though sources I found say that usually, like, sometimes the Pricolici can turn into other things besides dogs and wolves. They aren't necessarily werewolves. They're supposedly sometimes just shapeshifters in general, but all the examples that I could find, it was just the story of a husband being married to some lady. I don't think they were that forward-thinking. And at some point, for whatever reason, something overtakes him, and he has to leave, and he comes back as a dog. The dog attacks the wife. The wife gets away. Then the husband returns, and he's found out as being a Pricolici. So it seems like more... To me, it seems like more the Pricolici idea was associated with this idea of a wild dog that attacks someone in the woods when the husband is not around. And that's it. That's what I gathered from it. And that's why I said that a lot of these myths are really not that interesting. Because when it comes down to it, the Pricolici thing is just one... Like, if it's based off anything, it's one time someone saw a very big dog. And that's it. Like, there's so many modern monsters that people make that are trying to be creative. Like, they're just the crazy... Like, take a Xenomorph, for example. Like, something everyone knows. Xenomorph, how do you describe a Xenomorph? Vaguely humanoid, can walk on all fours, can also walk on two legs, completely black, almost sort of skeletal looking, but not quite, has no eyes, well, does have eyes, but they're like inside, you can't actually see them, sort of has the appearance of a long skull, and has like little tubule things coming out of its back, or nubs, I don't know how to describe it. Like, it's very difficult, isn't it? Whereas if it's like, if I describe a more ancient monster, like some of the most complicated thing I can think of, like a chimera. Like, what is a chimera? Or a version of a chimera that you'd be familiar with. Imagine a lion, except it has the tail of a snake, and it has wings. And maybe its front legs are like bird legs. And that's the most complicated it ever gets. All the rest of them are, like the Pricolici, what is it? It's a wolf, yeah? But it's big. It's like a really big wolf. Wow! A really big wolf? Very good, Timmy. They suck. Like, his idea, they're just shitty. They're just boring, shitty concepts. But... not to shit on ancient people, but wow. A lot of ancient monsters are just something they saw that was bigger than they expected, and it freaked them out. Or it's a combination of two things. Like, what if a snake, but it flies? Ooh. Which ends up becoming a dragon through various means. And it's really not that creative of an idea. Because, just... people back then had a very, like, you knew what you saw because you didn't have the internet. Like, you don't have modern learning. You don't have, like, if I existed in the same area, a few hundred years ago or whatever, then I wouldn't know what an elephant is. I wouldn't know what a giraffe is because I would never have seen them, and I never in my life would have talked to anyone that had ever seen them. Or would even know that even, like, Africa existed, or anything like that. It would just be completely out of my wheelhouse of experience. The only thing that I would know would be, like, okay, I've seen deer. One time I think I saw a cougar. And I was like, whoa, what is that? And that, just because I saw it that one time, that might be enough for me to come up with some dumb little myth. Because, to me, that would be like... That's one of the things that modern living misses, is that when you don't know things about the world because you haven't personally seen them, everything seems really magical and otherworldly. Because you can go through life and only experience a handful of things that exist on the planet that are there for you to experience. Which is something I've always found really interesting about the division between modern living and ancient living. Like, think of all the things that we take for granted that should be absolutely mind-blowing. Like, just an elephant, for example. Like, imagine living your entire life in whatever area that you're from, and the biggest thing that you've probably ever seen is like a deer, or like a moose or something. And then, just one day, you look over and there's just this elephant, and it makes no sense to you. Because it's this gigantic gray thing that has legs that sort of bend in a more like humanoid sort of way, because, their knees face one direction. They're kind of slow moving, they have gigantic ears. You can't really tell if the thing on their face is supposed to be a mouth or if it's like a nose, because, elephants do as elephants do. So it's just astonishing. It's mind-blowing. You have no way of even describing what it is to other people. And that's how you get stuff like unicorns. Because you end up, someone sees a rhinoceros, and then whenever they come back to their dirty, unwashed European kingdom, and they're trying to describe to their idiot king, who's in his chair scratching his ass and drinking wine, bring me pretty story from Africa, entertain your king. This what kings... I shouldn't have done that so loud. That's what kings sound like. As they clap their little walrus flippers together. I'm royalty. I'm better than everyone. Duh. I don't have a high opinion of royalty. Whenever they get stories back, how do you describe what a rhinoceros is? You say, well, it's like, it's on all fours. Imagine a horse. Imagine like a horse, except it's like stockier, low to the ground, and it's gray, and it has a single horn on its head. And I'm not saying this is definitively where the whole idea came from or anything like that. Just, this is, I don't know if it's an old wives' tale, something I'd have to research. But the idea is that the myth of the unicorn came from a rhinoceros. But I'm just kind of bullshitting at the moment, just to give you an idea. But, if you take information like this back to someone else, then what are they going to do with it? The only thing they can do is unite what experiences that they already have with their imagination. So you end up with, so like a horse, but it has a horn on its head. And then you get a unicorn. Which, unicorns are also one of the most boring creatures that you could ever imagine. It's just a horse. Like, what a shitty animal. It's like a horse, except it's a horse. Exactly. In every way. Except I took some glue, put it on the end of a cone, and put it right there. Wow. It's so magical. What an elegant beast. No one is ever going to top this one. It's shitty, right? It's very shitty. Okay. Oh, God. Oh, what a mess. And oh my God, I still have like half an hour to go. Oh my God. Okay, I do have a lot to talk about, but at the same time, it like drives me because my thoughts are so disorganized. Because I'm trying to talk about everything at once. But anyways, I think I've nailed down why I've started doing this, though. I picked a Pricolici because it was associated with Romania, and I wanted to be focused on that. I chose a Pricolici because of the association with vampires and werewolves at the same time. So sometimes people explain Pricolici as being Dhampir, which, like a vampire and a human having a baby together. Like Alucard in Castlevania is a good example of this. And then that Dhampir gets infected with lycanthropy, or, werewolfism, whatever you want to call it. And that's the thing that makes them Pricolici, because they're like they're a vampire, essentially, that is transforming into a werewolf. Sometimes. Other times, the idea is that if you are a human being, and you are especially evil and wicked, and you just are a very bad person, whenever you die, you will be resurrected. And you might be a Pricolici. And again, this goes back to the concept of sometimes Pricolici is not a fusion of a vampire and a werewolf. Sometimes it's just a werewolf. Sometimes it's just a vampire. Sometimes it's just a zombie. Sometimes it's just a generic idea of an evil thing that is supposed to be dead. And there's not really a description of what it physically looks like. But sometimes that's what a Pricolici is. It's just an evil person that died and was resurrected, and they have like sin in their heart because they're just a naughty boy. Another Pricolici. And some other times it is because they're a combination of those two, where they were a werewolf that was killed, and that werewolf was brought back from the land of the dead, and now it is sort of a zombie that is also a vampire. And then there's some other, like, there's also other times where a vampire is not like our conception of a vampire. It's just, you know, like an evil zombie creature. It's a demon that was brought back from the dead. It's just a person. Like an evil person that is there to inflict suffering on the living. So it's almost sort of a ghost. And sometimes that's what a Pricolici is. It's, you know, it's not a werewolf. It's like that concept of a vampire, which is just like a ghoul that has been brought back, but it also can shapeshift. So, it just, whatever your preference is, it can be that. That's how much of a mess these old folk tales are. They can be anything you want them to be. Oh boy. You can see why I get frustrated trying to talk about this, because you sort of have to explain everything and every possibilities. It's really hard to pick this is why it's taking me so long. Like, well, how come it took him so long to write this 2.5 hour long video? Why is it 2.5 hours long? This is it. Something I've said before, and something I said at the end of that video, is that if you are not learning while you are writing, you are not writing correctly. Because writing is not about, and like the videos I make, are not about me lecturing you about something that I know. Ooh, look at the thing that I know. Here's all the information about it, guys. No need to thank me. I'm just that great. That's not what writing is. Even whenever you're doing like a biography or something, or even an autobiography, you're writing about yourself even. Like, fuck it. It's more about learning in the process of writing. Because as you write, you have to... Humans are like this. Humans like to exist thinking that they know something. Like, I know everything there is to know about my own life, for example. But I really don't, because there's many things that I've forgotten. There's many things that, upon closer evaluation, they may have been different. There are situations I've been in with other people in which they behaved in a certain way, but in hindsight, I realize, oh, they were doing this for this other reason. It just depends. And in writing information, like this video that I'm making is about the concept of, and this is going to speed up now that I finally got to the color phase. It took me a long time to come up with a finalized pose that I actually liked. Because I was trying to make this thing look mainly like a wolf. I'm getting so distracted. Let me finish this other thought. In the process of actually writing, this video was about game design. And more specifically, I had been playing Dead by Daylight, and I started thinking about all the various kind of flaws that the game has, and all of its strengths, and why those things happened, and that fascinated me. And I was like, how come this fascinates me? So I started writing something about that, and then I came up with the idea of, well, this needs to be a more general video about game design, and the process of building upon basic concepts, like working up from a primary, which is what I have been doing in this video. I take a very loose, blobby idea of a shape that I want, and then I work up from there. And that's what the video was about. So it's about the concept of working up, it's about the concept of game design, it's about the concept of how do we make a game from a similar concept as this other existing game, but have it be different but still the same thing. And also, I need to criticize the actual game itself, Dead by Daylight, in the process of doing this. So I had to unite all those concepts into something that was a cohesive thought. So it had to be written in such a way that it conveyed all these things, but at the same time had all of its thoughts organized in such a way that... Here I use my reference of a cute little wolf. I had to organize all my thoughts in such a way that it actually made sense as one coherent thing. Anyways, you get the idea. That's why it took that's why the video is 2.5 hours long, and why it took like 2.5 months just to write, organize all the thoughts, rewrite 3 times, because at the same time, Dead by Daylight has been changing its design more dramatically than it ever has, and this is the only time in history it's ever been like this. And because they've been doing that, I had to rewrite a few things and amend it with more information, and even now it's still out of date. Because right now they're doing the PTB thing where they're trying to make it so that everyone can be slugged and pick themselves back up, and there's like a Mori system that was just invented that completely alters how the game is played, potentially. And it's going to be out of date by the time the video's done. But anyways, that's what's been going on. And that's the reason why whenever you write, you're learning. Because you're having to take thoughts that in your head are just sort of in there, and whenever you actually have to write them down and teach someone else something, only then do you realize how little that you know. And only then do you realize how all the things that you thought you knew were not really solidified in your head in a coherent way. They were just sort of loose ideas, approximations of learning. And whenever you actually do evaluate them and solidify them, you end up learning even more, and you might even realize that you didn't know anything in the first place. That's just how learning is. The more that you evaluate ideas, the more that you perfect them. But anyways, the physical design of this thing, which I probably should have talked about at the very beginning of the video, but I didn't do that. The design of this thing. Because of all these associations with vampires, but mainly wolves, because let's face it, the Pricolici, when it comes down to it, is one time a Romanian saw an especially large wolf. And so, whoa! Wolves aren't supposed to be that big, right? They are. Wolves are actually way bigger than dogs. It's just that we're so used to seeing dogs that we forget about it. But he saw a very big wolf one time, and it freaked him out. Now, whoa, a big wolf! It must be a magical creature because someone hid all this poop in my pants. The wolf hid poop in my pants. It couldn't have been me. It's gotta be a magical wolf. So big. I don't know why. It kind of gets Stamper-ish at the same time. Yeah, magical wolf. But obviously I didn't want to just draw a big dog. Even though all of the descriptions are like, it's a very big dog. I looked at that and I said, I'm not drawing a fucking woman wearing white, you unimaginative, stupid, inbred fucks. Goddamn humans. Most boring motherfuckers in the world. Have to come up with the most generic things. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to draw a cryptid girl that is just a wolf. Not just a very big dog. That's so boring. So I went with most Wikipedia-style codified concept of what a Pricolici could be. Which is, what if a werewolf, like mainly still wolf, but it had sort of a vampire connotation to it and sort of an undead connotation to it. Because there's that part of it as well. So I thought, this is a vampire that has been killed or something of that nature, or it's a werewolf that was buried after it was killed. Because, the vampires can also just be undead, that have risen from the grave. It depends on the context. And I will make it so that this thing that I'm drawing, this lady that I'm drawing, looks like mainly a werewolf, but sort of looks also like a vampire, but also sort of looks like an undead. So if you're wondering, why is she wearing a ripped up, dress with her gigantic tit hanging out? And no, I never add in a nipple. That's for the people that edit my drawings and then put them on Rule 34 sites, and then I get people begging for pornography in my commissions. And I have to explain to them, no, I didn't actually draw those. And then they're like, oh, I thought you drew the pornography, but I want to beat off super bad. You need to help me. And then I had to block them. This has happened multiple times. Stop doing this. You will add the nipple. You will add the nipple. Just like a real mythological creature that iterates with its ideas over times, you guys will take my existing drawing and perfect it by adding the nipple. And let's face it, 2 or 4 extra breasts. Let's just be clear. Anyways, in creating the pose for this thing, and creating the way that it looks, I thought, I'm going to add like tufts to the forearms to sort of look like it's the beginning of bat wings in a weird way. And I'm going to draw the hair in such a way that it also sort of looks like the curvature of like gargoyle sort of wings, to sort of create that loose association with bats without it being explicit. Because a lot of design is just based on silhouettes and how the eye reads things, and even if it's not coherent, then it still works. And so if you're thinking, well, the hair's clearly not a wing, that's not what I mean. I mean, it's just whenever you glance at the damn thing, then you're supposed to go, oh, like profile, like winged profile for like a split second. And even if you don't literally think it, you're still sort of mentally associating it in a very vague way. That's what I wanted. And I decided to go with really long black hair because, Romania. And also because long hair, especially black hair, is often associated with sort of the undead, depending on what area of the world that you're in. I didn't know about Romania and that area, not so much that. It's more usually Asian areas, I found. Like, obviously, especially like Korea and China and Japan. But, I guess there could be some, like, stray thinking that way. But it still works. So I kind of took a little bit of leeway in that. But more, I wanted the body profile to be very long and lanky, so that you could see that if she were walking on all fours, which I mentioned that she could do, then you could, for like a split second, if you just got a glance at it, think, oh, a wolf, a gigantic wolf. As you discover that someone has concealed poop in your pants and you run away to tell everyone about it. So, generic profile of both a person and a wolf, but also the, ligature or whatever, and sort of musculature that makes it clear that it is something that could be like undead or have that sort of vampiric association with it as well. It kind of works. It kind of works. But as far as the dress goes, I started looking up Romanian dresses, and I did not like what I found. Because traditional dresses are usually traditional because people don't really wear them in day-to-day living. They're more for like festivals and garbage like that. So I decided not to use one of those. Or actually, at the time, I decided I'm going to use something that's more subdued. So I will eventually go back over it with like patterns. But once I got to the end of the drawing, I decided, you know what, that would probably overpower things, and I'm tired of working on this. This drawing took 15 hours. Like, once I was finally done with it, to be fair, some of that time was spent, like, talking to chat, whenever I streamed some of this on Twitch. Talking to chat, or looking over and trying to research something. So there were some periods of time where you notice, oh, he's not doing anything. It's because I was probably, like, talking to someone, or I was researching something. But still, this drawing probably took like 14 hours, 13 hours at the bare minimum. Very long time, so I got pretty sick of it. I actually did have the impulse to keep working on it, but I remembered I had to do like 4 or 5 of these this month. Or I want to do 4 or 5 of them. And that's going to drive me insane if all of them are as complicated as this. Because if you can't tell, doing this little project, it's not just a matter of looking at a name and looking at Wikipedia and going, oh, it's like a werewolf vampire thing. Okay. And then, whatever, I'll have her tit hanging out. All right, I'm done. It's not like that. Obviously, like, for me, not everyone would be like this, but I try to put forth a lot of effort into exploring every element of the thing that I possibly can, even if it ends up just being a naked lady in a ripped gown. I do try. I was sitting there thinking about that as I was hard translating, like using Google Translate to pull in sources from Romanian encyclopedias and Romanian stories to try to translate them into English, and then asking my friend that speaks Romanian, like, what do you think about this? Like, for example, with the dress, for example, I decided, you know what, if I'm going to do this whole burial thing, what if I just had it be not like a werewolf that has ripped through its clothing, but someone that was buried that way, and now they have risen from the grave, and the reason why that their clothing is all torn up is because of the fact that they're, an undead. So that's where I got the idea from the dress from, the way that it looks physically. Is because I noticed that for some reason, I started Googling, like, pictures of, this is morbid, but, like, Romanian burials and coffins, people, interred within them. And obviously most of those are going to be men, so it didn't really do me much good. But the few cases where I found women or girls buried, a lot of them, because they're like news stories, and as a result they're more documented. They're more documented. There were more that were young girls that were buried. Because it was something that would be newsworthy. Otherwise, if it's just like some old lady, they're not going to keep any records of it, really. Just another person died. What do they care? But if I had to ask about this, and my friend, I was saying, a lot of the pictures that I'm finding are of the women buried in white dresses. And I asked, is it common for them to be buried in white for some reason? Like, does it have something to do with, purity or whatever? And the answer was, sometimes if, especially a young girl, which is why I guess this was happening, is, killed very early on and was not married, she will be buried in white, because, virginal purity, she was taken before her time, that sort of loose idea. So I thought, that'll work, I'll do that. So I decided, this is probably a lady that was unmarried, still hot, unmarried, was killed through some tragic means. Maybe she was attacked by a vampire or a werewolf. Probably more attacked by a werewolf in this concept. And then after she was buried, or maybe she was a werewolf or a vampire that was staked through the heart, and maybe that's the reason why her dress was torn in this area. And whenever she rose back as an undead, she became what she is now. And that's the reason why her dress is too small, and so forth and so on. Despite the fact that I just wanted to be a pervert. It couldn't be that, no. So I imagine that's what her story is. As far as real stories go, I already mentioned that, but most of them do tend to be, there once was a wealthy man that had married a poor woman. He was a Pricolici, but she wasn't aware of it. And let's see, there's one or two other ones. Yes, okay. Sorry, this is another thing. I have a lot of reference materials that I'm looking at. Yes. No. Get rid of those two. Okay, yeah. A Pricolici who was keeping up the appearances of a normal life. One day he was riding in his carriage with his wife, and his wife didn't know about it. He felt the change coming over him, which tells me that it may not even be associated with nighttime or the moon the way that we associate werewolves these days. It may just be just the evil had him, and the way that Pricolici seems to work in the actual stories is that you're otherwise a completely ordinary person, and you are aware of what you are to some degree, even if you don't explicitly know that you are a Pricolici for whatever reasons. Oh, we actually got to the very end. Look at that. I had to go in and hard adjust the levels to make the image more dark, because my Cintiq monitor does not like being accurate for whatever reasons. But anyways, final darkened image. I hope this ends up being correct as far as the tone and everything goes. Actual final images ended up being okay. I may have gone too heavy with the texture on that brush and the clouds behind. And I spent a lot of time zoomed out, so some of the actual details, like the line work, is... I tried to be very light with my line work, which has the inadvertent effect of making the pixels not have enough opacity. So whenever you do a pass-through with color, you end up having a lot of white spaces that you don't want. So that requires a lot of cleanup. Unless you're viewing things on like a cell phone, in which case you won't notice any of those things. Thank goodness for cell phones. But anyways, yeah, as far as the actual stories go, that does seem to be it, that it's just a person leading a double life for whatever reason. And how they become a Pricolici, I don't know. But that seems to be the association. They end up attacking the people that they love the most, and they're not aware of it. And once the people around them become aware of, oh, my husband is a Pricolici, then the townspeople take matters into their own hands. So it's almost a tragic story. So maybe that's what happened to her instead. Maybe she was sort of a werewolf, style Pricolici, that was killed whenever she was found out. Like her husband was going to town on her and she was having a good time. Because this is a caring husband that actually does care about whether his wife is feeling satisfied. But then she turned into a werewolf, and he was inside of a big wolf. Oh my goodness, can you imagine that? I know that you guys can. I know what you guys are up to. And then he was like, how could this be? Someone hid my dick in this wolf. It was magic, guys. So he ends up running and telling the town people, and after the town people high-five him, then they have to kill the wife because she's like a horrible werewolf. And then after she is killed, she revives as a vampire. And so maybe there's like two different kinds of Pricolici in that case. Goes hand in hand with things. There's the werewolf types, and then there's also the ones that are that plus they're also undead, meaning that they're also vampires. And whether they sustain themselves on blood or raucous intercourse, I don't know. That's up to you and your perversions to decide. Either way, that's it for now. Again, in the comments, leave me, especially if you're someone that's not, if you're just some jackass from America, you don't have anything. Let's face it, we're fucking boring. The only thing that we have is whatever the Native Americans left for us, as far as cryptids go. Or we have, like, our boring, oh, one time I saw an owl. That's the Mothman or whatever. I don't give a shit about that stuff. But if you're from some weird part of the world that I've never heard of, because I'm an American and I don't know anything, and you have a weird cryptid that no one ever talks about, in more like mundane fiction like movies, then tell me about it. And maybe I'll draw that one. Because I really like learning about these things. These weird cryptids that I've never heard of before in my entire life. It's always interesting. But the more information that I can find about them, the better. So if it's something that you just heard from your grandma once and you can't find anything about it online, I won't be able to do anything with it either. So anyways, do that. I will pick it up and that will be my second video. And it will probably take a bit because this first one required me to do all this other stuff. So I ended up having a week where I couldn't do anything. So it will probably be more like, I hope at least 4 videos. I can't promise 5. And I hope it's not 3. That's what I'm aiming for. Anyways, sorry for all the wait, but that's what I've been doing. It has been a hectic nightmare lately. So you guys enjoy this October. October, fall, autumn, this is the best time of year. There's no argument. Even I like summer. You're wrong. Summer is awful. It's awful. I grew up around people, I love summer. I'm like, I'm going to slap the shit out of you, stupid motherfucker. And then I did, and I stabbed them, and they'd become a vampire. This is the best time of year. Please enjoy it. Hopefully I can help you to enjoy it as well. See you guys next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for all the support.